Ready, Set, Bake. My name is Raeya and I'm so excited for season 1 of this series. The main purpose of Ready, Set, Bake is to teach you guys how to make Instagram-worthy desserts at home, even if you may be a beginner. I started baking a couple years ago when I was 13, when COVID was at its peak and we were all quarantined. I know how intimidating it can be to get into the kitchen and make something you've never made before, especially as a beginner. But I'm here to help you and to teach you the ins and outs of baking and cake decorating. Today we'll be making this delicious lemon cake. It features a moist lemon sponge stacked in between layers of tart lemon curd and a silky vanilla buttercream. In today's episode, you'll learn how to make each component, how to stack and crumb coat a cake, and how to decorate one flawlessly. I'll be breaking down and simplifying every step so you can gain confidence in the kitchen. So let's get started. Let's make our lemon sponge. So I have a couple of ingredients set out here, already pre-measured. I have some flour, some sugar, some room temperature butter, a bit of baking powder, baking soda, some vanilla extract, eggs, milk, and our lemons. So the important thing to remember when measuring is that you always want to get the correct amounts. My favorite way to use this is to use a scale, a kitchen scale, that helps me get the most accurate measurements rather than using cups. Flour, for example, is a really easy ingredient to get mixed up with because flour can be packed, it can be fluffed up, so it's always important to measure your flour correctly. So with that being said, let's get on to it. So I'm adding my baking powder and baking soda into my flour. So these are just mixing up the dry ingredients, and I'm just gonna give them a quick whisk. Now I can just set this off to the side while we get the rest of our ingredients prepared. So with my sugar, I'm gonna zest some lemons into there. So I have some lemons here, I've already washed them, and I'm just gonna zest them straight into my sugar. The reason why we're doing this is because the zest contains a lot of those delicious lemon extracts which contain the lemon flavor. And when we mix them into the sugar, it's kind of infusing those lemon extracts into the sugar, and it's gonna give us that amazing flavor. So I'm going for about 3 lemons worth of zest. Once I've zested all of my lemons, I have it in with the sugar, I'm gonna go in with a spoon and just kind of mash it together. And this is like what I was saying before, is getting all of the lemon extracts incorporated in with the sugar. As we continue to mix, it'll start to get clumpy, which means that you've done a good job. So it's nice and clumpy, it's kind of sticking together, kind of like kinetic sand, and we're gonna set this aside with our dry ingredients. Now we're gonna move on to juicing our lemons. So we've zested them, and I'm gonna give them a gentle roll on my work surface, just to loosen them up a bit, and this will help us juice them a little easier. So I'm just cutting them into halves, and then I'm using this little tool here and just juicing them. We're going for about 1/3 of a cup of the lemon juice here, and I'm probably gonna use about 2 to 3 lemons. I have my 1/3 cup of lemon juice, and I'm gonna add it to the 2/3 cup of milk that I have. And you'll see it's gonna get a little curdled, but don't worry, that's completely normal. It's just something that happens. If you've ever seen those like videos or tutorials where you can make buttermilk at home by adding lemon juice to milk, we're basically doing the same thing, except we want more of that lemon flavor since it's a lemon cake, so we're just adding a little more. This is gonna go off to the side and we can start making our batter. So I brought back our other ingredients, and I also have a large bowl, and I'm gonna start with our room temperature butter and put it in. Also going to add our sugar straight in. So I have these, the sugar and the butter, and we're gonna mix them together. I'm using a hand mixer today, but feel free to use a stand mixer. However, I wouldn't recommend doing it completely by hand because that's gonna be hard to get that fluffy, creamy product. You can see here that the sugar and butter is combined, but it's not really flowing together smoothly. It's just mixed, but it's not creamed yet. So continue mixing until you get that lighter color. So after mixing for a couple more minutes, it's lighter in color, it's fluffy, all of those telltale signs that I said before. And we're gonna add our vanilla. And then I'm also going to crack an egg in here. We're gonna add our eggs one at a time, make sure they're fully combined. When making a cake batter, we're adding our eggs one at a time because we're making an emulsion of the egg whites in here, which is like water-based, and then the butter, which is fat-based. We don't want it to become separated or curdled. We want it to be combined nicely, which is why we're just gonna add one egg at a time. After the addition of each egg, I'm going to scrape the bowl down and make sure everything's getting evenly mixed. So I've scraped it down and I'm going to add my second egg. And I'm just going to repeat that for the rest of the egg. And the last egg. I've added all three of my eggs into the bowl with my butter and sugar, and we can see that it's not separated or curdled. Instead, it's one smooth mixture, and that's what we get from adding the eggs one at a time. Now it's time to add our wet and dry ingredients. The method we're using today is going to alternate between the dry and wet. So we're going to add a third of our flour mixture in. Mix it. Once it's combined, we can add half of our milk, the second third of our flour, and we're just gonna go back and forth until we've ended on our dry ingredients. So I'm gonna go ahead and add a third of our flour in. I'm gonna give that a mix. It's just combined, we don't wanna overmix. I'm gonna add a half of our milk and lemon juice. And then the second third of our dry ingredients. Another mix. The last of our wet ingredients. And then the last third of our dry ingredients. Once there are no streaks of flour left, we can just give it a scrape using a spatula, just to be sure that everything from the bottom is evenly mixed in. I can smell the lemon from the cake batter, it's so good. Now it's time to put our batter into our pans. So here I have a 6-inch pan. I've already pre-greased it. I've added some butter to the bottom and then just put parchment on top. The butter helps the parchment stick. And we're using 3 of them today, but I'll just show you how to fill one of them. So I'm taking a third of my cake batter and I'm going to put it into the pan. So that's about a third of our batter, and I have an offset spatula here. You can see how my hand is kind of heightened from the base of the spatula, and I'm gonna go around and just smooth it out. And what this helps us do is it helps us have that nice level flat top. When you're baking a lot of cakes, because of the leveling agents, which is the baking powder and baking soda, it can make a dome when you bake them. So just by leveling it off, it helps it to kind of bake more evenly and to get that nice flat top on there. So I'm gonna repeat that for the rest of my pans, and we can put that in the oven. My oven is preheated to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's gonna go in there for about half an hour to 45 minutes. You can check to see if it's cooked by just sticking a toothpick into the center, and if it comes out clean, you're good to go. The cakes are out of the oven. They've cooled for about 5 or so minutes. They're still warm though, and we're gonna go ahead and invert them onto our cooling rack. So I'm just taking my layer here, and I like to shake it around a little bit, just like a gentle shake, just to make sure it's not stuck to any of the surfaces of the pan, and then you just flip it over. Once it's flipped over, we can just peel off the parchment paper. And that's it. We're just gonna let them cool and they're ready to decorate. It's time for the exciting part. Now we're gonna start decorating our cakes. The first step is to level off our cake layers. I like to take a sheet of parchment and put it on my turntable to avoid the cake sticking to it. And I'm gonna take my first cake layer and put it on here. You can see my layers are fairly flat, so we're not cutting it to get that dome off. We're just cutting it to get a bit of the browning off. So I'm taking a large serrated knife and I'm making a little cut right below where the browning is. I'm gonna rotate my cake turntable as I'm slicing all the way through. And then once I make it back to where I made that first cut, I'm gonna cut all the way through. This will give us that nice sharp cut instead of tearing the cake. So you can just take the top layer off, and this is something you can snack on while you're decorating your cake. And you can see here, we have that nice decorated cake. I'm gonna repeat that with the rest of my cake layers. Cake board. This is a thicker cake board. It's also called a cake drum. It works the same. This is just so I can transfer it in and out of the fridge in between the steps. So here I have some buttercream. This is a standard American buttercream, and it's the simplest buttercream to make, which is why I highly recommend it, and it's what I use for all of my cakes. If you're using something like a Swiss or Italian buttercream, which are meringue-based buttercreams, it's a little more difficult to make, but they're also different consistencies and a lot softer. So you can see here that this is a little stiffer, and before I use it, I always like to give it a good whip, just to make sure that there's no air bubbles, and so to make sure it's just mixed in properly. So I start by placing just a small dollop of it onto my cake board, and this helps to stick the cake there. And I'm just making sure that my cake is center on there. Then I'm gonna add another dollop. This time it's a larger dollop because this is what's gonna be filled in between our layers. I'm adding a good amount, and I'm using my smaller offset spatula just to spread it around. And then I just turn my turntable to just spread it like so. Once it's spread around, I'm just gonna scrape it so I have a clean spatula, and I'll make a little well in the center. Once I have the well, I'm gonna fill it with the lemon curd. I already made this ahead of time, and I've just put it into a piping bag with a small snip on the end, and I'll just fill the little crater that I made with the lemon curd. This well ensures that the lemon curd won't spill out and it's all contained in there. I'm going to top it off with our second layer, and that's going on top. It doesn't matter which way you put it, you just want to make sure that it's just in the center on top so none of the edges are sticking out. I'm going to repeat the same process until I've stacked my cake. Once my last layer is on, it's time to crumb coat. Once again, I'm just gonna grab a dollop of my icing and just put it on the top of my cake. I'm using my offset spatula to drag it across. A crumb coat does exactly what it sounds like it does. It seals in the crumbs to make sure that it's not visible in your final coat. The crumb coat doesn't have to be thick at all. It's a super thin layer just to hold everything together. You can see my layers are sliding a bit just from the lemon curd, so you can always just put it in the fridge and then come back and crumb coat it. So that's what I'm gonna do. So the cake is back from the fridge. It's chilled and you can see now that the layers aren't sliding around as much. So I'm gonna continue with my crumb coat. I'm taking blobs of frosting and putting them just around the outside of the cake. And once again, it's a very thin layer. It's not super thick. It's just to seal in the crumbs, and by no means does it have to be perfect. That my whole surface area of the cake is covered with frosting, I'm going to smooth it out using my scraper. So using the sharp edge on the bottom, I'm going to line it up and scrape. I'm applying quite a bit of pressure because I want to take any of the excess frosting off of the cake. And this will leave us with a nice base. Once I'm done that, once again, I'm going to scrape off my spatula and bring the sides in. What I'm doing is I'm holding it parallel to the cake and bringing it in. Scraping it off, and then I'm just going to repeat this. I'm going to place this into the fridge once again for it to chill, and then we'll apply the final coat. So my cake has finished chilling. I can touch it and there's no buttercream on my hand, so that's how I know it's ready for the final coat. So here's my buttercream. I'm going to take some and put it into a separate bowl I have. What we're doing for the outside is a look where it's kind of yellow and then white at the top, kind of like a gradient. So I'm taking around half of the buttercream I have. It's always good to use more buttercream than you actually need because I like to put a lot on and then scrape it off, and then that'll give us a nice effect. And it's also a lot easier too. So taking about half, I'm leaving a little more white than yellow. So I have some yellow food coloring here. I'm using a gel food coloring rather than a liquid food coloring because it won't water down my buttercream and it'll keep its stiff consistency. So I'm using a toothpick to take a little bit out, and I'm just adding a little bit in. I'm using a spatula here just to mix it in, and I'm looking for a nice light yellow shade. I'm going for a warmer yellow rather than kind of a neon yellow because I feel like it looks a lot better. Now that I have my yellow buttercream and it's all mixed up, the colors even throughout, I can start applying it to my cake. So I like to actually start with the top. I'm taking basically all of my white buttercream and just plopping it on the top of the cake. Once it's all on there, I'm using my large offset spatula to spread it around. You can see I'm kind of going in like a sweeping motion, and my turntable is doing most of the work. So I have a little too much on here, so I'm just gonna scrape it off and then continue so it's a nice smooth top. Once I'm happy with how it looks on the top, I can start taking it and moving it along to the sides. I'm keeping it in a thick layer so that when I scrape off, I'm not revealing too much of the cake. And then I can go in with more of my white buttercream along the sides, just to cover up any areas that need some work. Once I've gone about halfway up, I can start filling it in with my yellow buttercream. So I'm gonna go in with my smaller spatula this time, just so I have a little more control. So I'm taking a dollop of it and then just kind of scraping it and sliding it up. And I'll do that along the perimeter of the cake. So I finished applying my yellow buttercream on the bottom, and I'm gonna kind of use my spatula and just swirl the two colors in, just so that it blends a little better. I'm not blending it in too much because it's gonna blend a little more when we scrape, but just enough so that there isn't much of a border between the colors. I'm going in with my scraper once again, and it's important to make sure that when you're scraping that it's straight. A lot of people will kind of hold it to an angle so that the cake is not straight on the edges, and instead it's like kind of angling in or angling out even. But my trick is to kind of spread your fingers just along the scraper like so, and then holding it parallel to the cake, a 45-degree angle towards you, and just smoothing it out. You can see after one pass around, I have quite a few gaps along the sides. So I'm going in. You can see how I have some yellow buttercream on the bottom and white on the top. I'm taking the white off of the scraper and putting it into the white, and then the yellow into my yellow bowl, just so that it doesn't get mixed up. And then I can use my spatula to go over any gaps. So the cake decorating process is basically just that. You're repeating the steps of scraping and then filling in any patches until you're happy with the result. Once the bottom is patched up and all of the holes are covered, I'm gonna go around with my scraper once again. You can see there are significantly less gaps, but I'm gonna go in one more time, just to be sure that there are no gaps showing. This will help us achieve that smooth sides with no air bubbles. Now that I'm happy with how the sides of my cake looks, we can now smooth out the top. You can see there's still a couple of imperfections, but I'm not going to worry too much about that because we're adding loads of decorations on top. My trick to getting sharp edges is to pop this in the fridge, and then we'll cut the edges, the layer on top, out afterwards. And this gives us some super smooth, sharp edges instead of just bringing it in with a spatula, which gives us some more rounded edges. So I'll pop this in the fridge and then I'll be back. After it came out of the fridge, I went in with my scraper and cut off the crown that was kind of on the edge of the cake. Now that we've finished that, you can take a deep breath. It's time for the easy and fun part for decorating the top of the cake. So here I have some different decorations. I have some macarons, some meringues, some dried lemons, and some rice paper sails. So I made these macarons yesterday night, and now they're all ready. I've just filled them with some of my buttercream, and then I've made the rice paper sails. I have a whole tutorial on this on my Instagram. So let's get started. So I know which is gonna be the front of my cake. This is gonna be the front here, and I'm just gonna place some macarons on the back and on the side. So I have my first macaron here, and I'm gonna do a dollop. I just have my buttercream in a piping bag fitted with a 1M tip. The 1M tip is universally used, so no matter where you get it from or what brand, it's all gonna be the same. So I'm just making a little swirl, and I'm gonna place my macaron on top. And then I'm gonna do another one on the side. Once I've done that, I can move on to the other decorations. I put the macarons on first just because they're the biggest thing, and that's gonna take up the most space. putting the decorations on top. And now I'm gonna add a macaron and a rice paper sail on the bottom, just because you can see the bottom half is not very embellished, but the top has a lot going on. So on the side of the cake, on the opposite side to where the decorations are, I'm gonna place a dollop of frosting, just using my piping bag, onto the corner, and I'm just gonna use that frosting to stick my meringue there. So I like to get eye level with the cake, just so I can see what I'm working with. And I'm happy with that. You can see how it looks here. And then I'll add my rice paper sail onto there. I'm gonna use a big one this time. And I'll just insert it into the cake. Now I'm happy with the placement of the rice paper sail, and we can go for our final touches. I have a bit of gold luster dust, and I'm going in with just a small food-safe brush and just painting the edges of my macarons. And this will give them a nice kind of glow and golden look. Luster dust is one of my favorite ways to make a cake a little more fancy and a little more elegant. And I'll do some on the rice paper sails and lemon slices, a little bit of everything. And that's it, the cake is finished. Thank you so much for joining along with me while making this beautiful cake, and I hope you try it at home too. I'm gonna cut into it and we'll see the delicious layers of lemon curd and moist cake. Right here. I'm gonna get a nice big slice. And this is the slice of the cake. And now it's time to try it. I'm gonna get a bite with the lemon curd and the buttercream all in one. That is so good. The tartness of the lemon curd really complements the sweetness of the cake. Once again, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Ready, Set, Bake, and I'll see you next time.